All right, so welcome back to my podcast. And today I have with me a good friend. His name is James Herrick IV. He's going to be talking about his experience in engineering, and he has a very interesting family history with military background. And he's a poet, and he also has a very unique calling to Opus Dei. So we'll be talking about that. So James, great to see you. How did you get into engineering?
So it started when I was younger. I had a knack for math and science. So those were some of my favorite subjects. And I could tell that not only was it an interest, but there was an ability there and hearing more about not only the field of engineering being a good fit if you like those subjects, but also having a lot of family members who've done engineering. My dad was a mechanical engineer, and one of my great grandfathers was a civil engineer who served in the military for a while, became a general, served in the Army Corps of Engineers, and then played a big role in the design of the DC metro system, which I grew up near. So that was a big role model for me. And I was writing about him in my college essays, I remember. And I remember just looking up to him and being inspired by the ability to have that visible impact on your local community.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot to unpack there. So your grandfather, you had two grandfathers that were generals, right?
Yeah, so my dad had two grandfathers who were generals, and so for me, those would both be great grandfathers. And one of them went to West Point. His name was Curtis James Herrick, and then his son went to West Point, Curtis James Herrick Jr. And then my dad, who's Curtis James Herrick III, also went to West Point. So a lineage there, and I'm the fourth, Curtis James Herrick IV. But I broke the trend and went to Notre Dame instead.
You would probably have 100% guaranteed acceptance range if you tried to go to West Point.
It probably would have helped just to have the legacy. Although, ironically, if you go just because of the legacy, you a lot of people aren't happy if you just go because of that reason. From what I've heard, so definitely want to feel that calling. And even if you do have the legacy, I imagine it's still really tough, very selective. You have to get recommendations from one of the local politicians from where you are, and it's not easy, even if you do have a lot of family members who've gone.
Oh yeah, I mean it's absolutely. I've studied a lot about West Point in terms of like Dwight Eisenhower going there, and a couple of others, General MacArthur, and yeah, I mean West Point produces basically military generals and geniuses, and so for your
Yeah.
three of your family members to go, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, it is amazing. They do produce some amazing leaders. Like two guys in my dad's class. One of them, I think, is the chairman of Quilcom, and the other, there's another one who's like a 3 or 4 star general who's in charge of like the whole like Middle East or something, like operations. So they do. If you end up staying in for that long, there's a lot of leaders in his class by now, class of '88. So
Oh yeah, well he's got a lot of experience, so that's for sure.
yeah,
And that military history is and just in general the military is very fascinating to me. I've kind of been mulling over like maybe joining the military one day, especially now that I have a degree, maybe like as an officer. We'll see. But it's fascinating that also too your grandfather, one of them, designed the DC metro system. That was the first system I ever took too, and I thought it was great. I'd never seen anything like it. This huge, grand, beautiful, place, efficient, unlike unlike the New York system. They probably took
yeah,
lessons from New York, right?
they did. Yeah, I remember we got to spend some time in New York together, and I remember taking those subway systems in New York, and they're pretty tightly spaced, and you feel really crowded there. And the DC metro system, since it had the benefit of being built after and learning from the New York system, they had some things that they could do to enhance and improve it, like creating more space, adding things to the ceilings, not only to make them higher, but also uh, you know, you know, absorb some of the sound, like with the way that it kind of has those indents in the top of the ceiling. So they definitely make it feel more homey, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another fascinating thing that I know about you, though, I know you'll be willing to share, is who was it? Was it Roy Tinsley Dodge, or was it your other grandfather that built it was called the Roosevelt River Bridge in the Elbe River under enemy fire.
Yeah, so that was the same one. So Roy Tinsley Dodge, the one who helped to design the DC metro system. Before that, he served in World War II and commanded an engineering battalion. And they built a bridge across the Elbe River under enemy fire. And I think they had a couple other potential locations they were using as decoys because the enemy was trying to, as you can imagine, stop them from being able to do that. So that was very heroic moment in his life that I'm inspired by as well. And I think there's even articles where he's kind of joking, like, "Hey, we built this bridge under enemy fire in a day, and it's taken us decades to build this DC metro system."
Yeah,
um,
or decades even to build
it's
other infrastructure too.
Right. And as you can imagine, there's shortcuts, so to speak, or just prefabrication for those bridges and those situations in the military battles. And there's a lot of not only engineering but politics that goes into some of those larger infrastructure. But still, it was impressive he was able to do that so quickly in that intense battle situation.
Yeah, and another interesting thing. So that was the 17th Armored Battalion, engineering battalion, that is. And so he would have been a general. I guess was he a general at that point in the battalion, or like a
He may
colonel?
have become one afterwards, because I know he's also served in Korea and he served for a while. So may have been in Korea or maybe even after that he became a general.
I see. Well, the interesting thing about that, so enemy fire is huge, right? I mean, first of all, you're in a war, you're being shot at, right? You're in a war, active battle, and you're building a bridge. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah,
Another thing, even more important, was that was actually a key point in the Allied advance toward Germany, where actually the Soviet forces and American forces actually met right there at that river around that area, and then went from there to defeat the German forces. Very key,
yeah,
very important role in the war.
yeah. That definitely helped them advance further into Europe. So yeah, I'm very proud to have a family member who played a key role in that bridge that played a key role in that and just advancing further. So yeah, definitely big shoes to fill.
Absolutely. And I want to say too, even though my family wasn't involved in that, not that I know of, at least that part of it. I had some family members in World War II. I want to say that I'm thankful for the sacrifices that your family made, that your grandfather made. I can't imagine the fear, or maybe fearless, but still, I mean, being in a situation where your life's on the line for
Oh, totally.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, just thinking, I'm so grateful for. I mean, I have so many family members who served in the military, going back to the Revolutionary War. There were 19 Herricks in the Battle of Bunker Hill, for example.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Whole family.
And yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were probably half the battle there. Actually, fun fact, I was visiting there maybe 10 years ago, and just there's a memorial, a monument of people who died in the battle. And sure enough, going through the H's, I spotted a Herrick. There was an Ebenezer Herrick who had died in the battle there.
Wow.
But yeah, it is to your point, the sacrifices they make and the risks that they take. My grandfather, my dad's father, was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. That was a very dangerous job, and then even my brother, he's in the Air Force right now. One of his first flights, just training to fly, his engine went out midair flying a Cessna over the Chesapeake Bay,
Oh
and
my
he had to
goodness.
do an emergency landing with his instructor pilot. They turned out okay, but it was just hearing that story. It made me feel really grateful for his service, and also, in comparison, my job as a civil engineer, even though I have to make sure that my designs are safe, and I'm really, I'm not really that much in danger when I go to work, unless I get in a car accident or something, which is just the typical kind of risk that anyone takes. But definitely a higher risk of not even coming home, and those sort of veteran roles that a lot of them play. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what I'm going to post here, hopefully I can post it if it's public. I found a picture of your grandfather, Curtis Herrick II, or maybe he was a great grandfather, one of them, that had
Oh
a
yeah,
picture with the Filipino president Ferdinand Marcos, and I'm like, wow, that's cool. He got to meet Marcos. Whatever people
yeah.
want to think about him, still, I mean, that's quite an honor.
Yeah, it's quite an adventure that they've had, and it's yeah, it is amazing that both my dad's grandfathers ended up becoming generals.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I say I broke a trend, but in some ways I was continuing the trend in the sense of it goes general, colonel. My dad was a captain. Eventually, got to get to civilian, right? So I guess that's me.
yeah,
I'm the logical
right.
progression there.
Yeah.
Although my
So
brother's kind of continuing the military service. So.
you go. Yeah. So no, two-star general. Was it Roy Tinsley Dodge that was a two-star, or Curtis Herrick the first?
So Roy was the one star. That was my
Okay.
dad's maternal grandfather, and then Curtis James Herrick the first, the one who went to the Philippines. Yeah, he was the 2 star.
He was a two-star. Yeah. So that's a major general. And my understanding of it is to be a general, or certainly I think to be a two-star, three-star, one of them, that you have to get congressional approval. So, at that point, it's
Yeah, it's not
political.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Becoming a general, I mean, you typically, from what I've heard, you serve about 30 years, and if you're a colonel, you're usually a colonel at that point. And if you don't become a general, you usually retire at that 30 year mark. But yeah, often you're serving for about 30 years before you even become one. And like you said, at that point, it's definitely there's some high level approvals that need to happen. So
yeah. So, I mean, I can imagine what their military career would have been like 30, 40 years in, your whole time as a as an officer moving up right up to general, major general.
yeah,
I mean, geez, that's quite
and a lot
amazing.
of traveling, living all sorts
Yeah.
of places. My dad, because his dad was in the army, a lot of my dad's growing up, my dad was at 10 different places from K to 12. So you could just imagine, three different high schools. So my dad growing up saw a lot of places. He was born in Alabama and then moved around different parts of the continental US and then Hawaii at some point in middle school.
And,
He was in Virginia and Missouri for high school.
and well, it was the same for you. Well, you moved around a few times, right?
I did, yeah. It's funny looking back. A lot of people, when I tell them the places that I've been and moved around, they're like, "Wow, that's a lot." But compared to my dad, it still doesn't feel like a huge amount. But yeah, it's still a fair bit. I was in Colorado. My dad was stationed there. Then he started getting some civilian jobs in Virginia, then New Jersey, then Virginia again. So moved around a little bit, and then afterwards, Notre Dame and Indiana for college, New York City, where we met. After that, and I've been in California for almost 7 years, LA, and then now I'm in Berkeley.
Wow, it's already been 7 years. My goodness, feels like a year. I mean,
Right? Time
feels
flies.
it feels like just yesterday we were at Schuyler Hall in Opus Dei, New York City.
Yeah,
Learning about the really getting our faith formed really strongly. So wow, it's been 7 years.
yeah, good times. Yeah, so that's a special place, Opus Dei House in New York, and I've had a chance to live at a few in California now. So
Yeah, and speaking about Opus Dei, tell us a little bit more about what Opus Dei is. How did you get involved?
yeah, so Opus Dei in a nutshell is an organization, the Catholic Church. It's Latin for work of God. And it's a group that helps people um, basically find God in ordinary life through their work, their family life, their friendships. About 100 years ago, almost 1928, it was founded by Saint Jose Maria Escriva in Spain, and he realized that a lot of people needed to be reminded that um, the call to holiness is a universal one. It's not just for being a priest or a nun or a monk, which those are vocations that are a big service to the church and society. But if you're not in those categories, then the call to holiness, the bar isn't lower. But a lot of people felt that way. It's like, oh, you're deepening your prayer life, you're getting close to God. If you really want to live the real deal of the spiritual life, go join a religious order or become a priest or something. So Saint Maria played a big role just through God helping remind him, and then through him reminding other people that you can find God in any sort of ordinary activity. Throwing away a piece of trash, logging into the computer and typing some emails, all that can be offered to God, and especially trying to do your work well and giving God a good offering, and through that, especially growing closer to Him and bring people around you closer to Him.
Yeah, to add to that, I would say, I was like an outsider going there, just benefiting from the great spiritual formation they provide. But one thing that really resounded with me, really helped what really helped me in my own faith was think about, going back to Genesis, right? Adam and Eve sinned and therefore had to work, right? Man was then subject to work to eat and to therefore live. And it was sort of like
Right.
this was a curse for your sin. But then God uses Jose Escriva Maria and just in general with our Catholic teaching and saying, you know what? There's a whole new way of looking at work. You can actually sanctify your work, right? Whatever work
Right.
for the most part, as long as it's not sinful work, right? Being an
Exactly.
engineer, so washing dishes, if you're a dishwasher even, right? You can you
Yeah.
can you can offer that to God. If your work is tough, if you're having a bad day at work, if you're stressed out, you can offer all that up to God and to sort of help it sanctify you in a way as well.
Right. Yeah, because work was around before original sin too. So the real punishment is the effort and the kind of pain and
Yeah,
sweat and tears that results from the work that we experience. But work was a good thing even before original sin, and it continues to be a good thing. It's just there's more effort and pain involved often. And to your point, through the cross and through the mass that can be sanctified, especially when we go through some of those difficulties. You can sanctify that, and that's the amazing thing is, there's a lot of people who make big sacrifices to do good and serve society, like building a metro system for your local
yeah,
community. That's a big service, and but even more so, if you find a way to grow closer to God through that by doing it well and offering it to Him and trying to bring people around you closer to God, all of a sudden you're tapping into something that's supernatural beyond just the physical that you see, which is already good, but it's timeless. It's immeasurable. So all of a sudden, the meaning that you can draw from that, it just you know, it just goes up exponentially.
yeah. And you're young, older. I'm a year older than you, right? And I know a little bit, and you can share this here. I believe that you kind of learned about Opus Dei when you were in high school. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty young. High school is when I ended up joining Opus Dei, and there was a period of time where I was going to a lot of their formational activities. Starting in middle school, I was going to a school that members of Opus Dei were running, and learned about it through that and through an Opus Dei house that was nearby. Just all sorts of professional development, leadership activities they had, spiritual guidance that was available, different summer programs and retreats that they had. And just little by little, as I was deepening my prayer life and getting to know different members of Opus Dei, started to realize, you know what? Opus Dei really resonates with me. I benefited a ton from just that idea of developing a prayer life in the middle of the world and finding God in your work. And I started, it's this could be a 3 hour, a 30 minute, or 3 minutes story, but basically, eventually, I realized, I think God's calling me to be in the middle of the world, but dedicated to Him in a special way in Opus Dei, where I can just give myself completely and being available to move around if needed, or just more available for people. The kind of time and effort that I would spend raising a natural family, I'm dedicating towards helping people get to heaven. And most members of Opus Dei are what are called supernumeraries, which those are the ones that can get married and have a vocation to marriage. And then I'm what's called a numerary, which uh, dedicates themselves completely to be completely available, including giving a marriage to be available for that. And it's mainly a matter of availability. We're all equally members, if that makes sense. There's not a hierarchy of like, okay, numeraries are more a member or something, because we all have the same vocation to the same family and living the same kind of spiritual life and exercises that we do throughout the day and the week. But different focuses, different roles within Opus Dei, and people discern that. But the big thing is finding God in the middle of the world and helping people understand and appreciate and live that out, and then being available in different ways to the extent see where people see God leading them.
Yeah. And and it's a powerful story. And I want to, I wish I could really like drill into it because people would say that, oh, that's, nice and then move on. But for me, it actually had an impact on me as well. Just not being a numerary or supernumerary, just being a person, a good Catholic Christian. Um, I was sort of introduced to Opus Dei in 2017, and it was in July of 2017. And I may have heard about it before, but kind of never went. But then one day, somebody really got me to go, really got me interested, and I went. And I was like, man, why didn't I do this earlier in my life? Like you said, you did in high school. I went to a public high school. I wasn't even Catholic at the time. But man, looking back, I wish I would have had that kind of formation or at least whisper in my ear about it because who knows what had happened. I mean, my whole life could have changed at that point for the better. And
Right.
when I did go to Opus Dei, yeah, I would go on Saturdays. There would be a reflection. Where we reflect on scripture and formation teachings in front of the Holy Eucharist. And then there would be meditation, adoration, and then a dinner, and then usually like a kind of like a hangout time for the guys. And that was, I mean, phenomenal. Oh my goodness, it was a breath of fresh air for me. I learned so much spiritually. I think I grew spiritually. I was around just a lot of great guys who were well formed and came from great backgrounds. So I learned a lot just also by being around other people as well socially. So
Totally.
I mean, more than one thing. I'm very thankful for that work.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that just apostolate of friendship. It's that come and see. The apostles are just bringing their friends to see Jesus. It's a similar thing where Opus Dei, you typically won't see these big posters or advertisements in the newspaper or something like, okay, big event coming up. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's postings on the Opus Dei website of, okay, here's some upcoming events in Rome or whatever, or different, masses that are going to celebrate St. Maria in June or whatever. But usually, the activities, it's people bringing friends and getting to know just the spirit of Opus Dei and finding God in ordinary life. And one thing that I thought of as you were talking is I've realized people, it's like the laborers and the harvest, that parable where,
Yep.
some people are starting in the beginning of the day, some people towards the middle, and some people a little bit towards the end of the day. I found that with Opus Dei, as far as coming into contact and even people who join at different ages of their life, there's a certain story that everyone has, and there's a certain point where they encounter God more deeply. And uh, it's not like their life was wasted up until that point, but all of a sudden their life takes on a certain meaning, and then that journey takes on a certain more meaningful trajectory. And so I found Opus Dei when I was younger, growing up, joined Opus Dei as a junior in high school. I know other people who joined when they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s. There's people who probably joined in their 80s or 90s.
Wow. Yeah.
But it's something that God calls people at different times, and there's a certain I don't know, reaching out that God has throughout their life, and there's a certain moment where things click. And yeah, I think there's a certain experience that they bring up until that point, and that can inform how they carry out the rest of their journey. So um, I don't see it as like life wasted up until that point, if that makes sense. There's life experience that you can bring that you could see the before and after maybe a little bit more, and like see the reference point of, like you were saying, like, wow, okay, now my life has so much more meaning now that I've been able to discover and implement this in my life.
Yeah. Absolutely. And to your point, you mentioned, they don't advertise. Think about this to paint this picture to people who live in New York City or may have visited. So there's an Opus Dei Center. It's called, what's it called? Schuyler Hall. Okay. And it's on the corner of 34th Street, right down the street from the Empire State Building. It's on the corner of 34th Street and Lexington Avenue. Probably hundreds of thousands of people walk right by it or drive by it every single day, may not even know what it is.
Yeah.
I probably didn't at
Yeah.
first. Yeah. So, and it's
Yeah.
right
And that's
there.
the thing. It's not trying to be showy. And there's a balance there too, because sometimes it's like, okay, are you trying to be secretive then? But it's just a matter of discretion. It's like, okay, it's as we're sharing our experience with Opus Dei, it seems to be more naturally and effective where you can invite friends and they can kind of experience it for themselves, as opposed to I don't know, just like having a big sign and just drawing a crowd of curious people who like they may not get that much out of the activity if they don't have a friend who brought them and can explain what's going on. And
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that center there, I wish I had one in Orlando. I think the nearest one is in Miami, but
Mhm.
it's a beautiful place. You know, they have it's a huge facility. I think with 20 stories or so. There's a chapel on the second floor and or an oratory rather, and then there's a big like sort of like a chapel on like the 17th floor, a big something like that. And then there's a rooftop, and of course you have a lot of
Yeah,
people living there. You have private events there, retreats, all kinds of things in that building, just right there, all
yeah,
contained.
yeah. That's a special one because there's basically five centers in that building, five Opus Dei house residences, because you've got two for men on one side, two for women on the other side, and then you've got a retreat center for workshops and retreats on those upper floors. So it's a special one.
I see. Now, I want to talk more about that, but I also want to talk about another subject that you probably, I think you also got into in middle school, and that's poetry, right?
Yeah. So the school that I went to for middle school and high school, the Heights, it had a poetry competition, and you learned how to write and read poetry in some of your English classes. And that got me interested in reading and writing poetry. And it was a nice hobby. I was into music too. So sometimes that turned into songwriting. And we would have, for the poetry competitions, you could submit original compositions. So I started doing that, and it became a hobby. It was a great outlet. It was a great way to process things as I was discerning vocation or going through challenging times or trying to deepen my prayer life. It became a very valuable hobby, and it's not necessarily something you would think an engineer would get into. But the way I look at it, I did actually kind of like to write, and I think part of it is engineers. You find a structure and you learn to work within it, and so poetry, it's almost like you're structuring and playing with words, and you're following certain patterns and structures. And so that aspect, I think, actually works well with the analytical mind and engineering mind. And I do enjoy playing with words and working with puzzles. It's almost like solving a big puzzle. Like, okay, how can I fit my thoughts into this structure? And there's all sorts of structures there that you could explore and get into that may fit well with what you're trying to get across, or just your personality or style. So yeah, that grew recently where I got into a book that walked you through more exercises. And then I realized I was writing so frequently that I was building a good collection that I could eventually put into a book. So hopefully, maybe in the next month or two, I can get a book out there and start sharing with friends.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. And to your point too, you know, you have so many things going on. You're in school. You know, you have military background. It's good to have something like poetry or music as a hobby and as an outlet to kind of expand upon and to kind of explore as well. And it's good for the brain. It keeps the brain active in different ways. So it's very important. Yeah, I did music, which is very similar. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's great to, it definitely keeps you well rounded. And I found it helpful for work too, because engineering, especially civil engineering, there's technical skills, but there's a lot of interpersonal skills that you want to have to be effective. The way that you write emails, the way that you speak during meetings, the way that you coordinate different project tasks. A lot of that relies on written and verbal communication skills, which poetry actually can help you a lot with, because you think about rhyme and rhythm, and okay, you don't necessarily need to rhyme when you're talking at work, but the way that you talk and the pauses and the way you deliver, it can be improved by things like poetry. It helps you think about how you structure things.
absolutely, it's I think that for me, thinking about it, is kind of like the flow and putting certain words together or the conciseness of words and phrases. I think that would help a lot with poetry.
Definitely. Yeah, so it's been really rewarding for me just throughout. I would say, yeah, middle school for me, it was about, man, it's coming up on, I want to say like 17 years ago, more or less, is when I started writing poetry, which is also happens to coincide with around the time that I was building my life of prayer. So this book that I'm planning to come out with, I've got it broken up into three sections, and the book is called Dusk and Dawn: 100 Poems for Prayer, because I realized a lot of them are very contemplative, and a lot of them came out of my prayer and have helped other people with their prayer. And Dusk and Dawn also happen to be common times for prayer. And so I've got it broken up into three sections: journey, dusk, and dawn. So you're journeying through. Journey is like the kind of normal daytime. Dusk, okay, the sun's setting. You're going through some rough patches, and dawn, you're enjoying the brilliance of basically the sun coming back and just the beauty and the good things of life. Kind of like it's almost like the earthly life, purgatory, and heaven. Could think of it that way too.
Wow, yeah, that's quite remarkable how you kind of sequence it like that. So, ordinary people can also relate to it, perhaps in their prayer life as well, or maybe form a prayer life based on those poems.
Yeah, that would be my hope that people can relate to it, even if it's just on a human level, but potentially even as they're praying, they could use some of it. I know some people, I've texted them some of my poems, and they're like, "Wow, it was great. I'm going to take this to my prayer and
Yeah,
meditate on this." I'm like, "Wow, okay." And some of them I actually wrote while I was doing meditative prayer. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a distraction. There's always that balance because you do want to continue a conversation with God, but I've definitely found them to be very helpful in many times of prayer in my personal case. And having memorized some of them, sometimes if I don't even have any text with me, I can go through some of the poems that kind of capture certain thoughts that I want to communicate with God and talk with Him about.
oh, that's a very good way I think of it's interesting communicating to God like that through the poems and rhymes or whatnot that you make. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad to be able to. Yeah, everyone's got certain skills and talents that God gifts them with, and you can develop those even further. And
Mhm.
I found that to be an opportunity for me to do that. And I'm not saying like I'm any David or anything like as far as like the level of closeness to God that he got at certain points. Although he also had his kind of rough patches and mishaps and mistakes. But you have all those psalms that he wrote, and I can see, I can relate with that experience of writing because I often write in segments of 4 lines each, and a lot of the psalms seem to be structured like that. At least if you go to mass, you have like 4 lines at a time, or if you listen to a song, you have 4 lines at a time. And I kind of like to break it up that way too. Just for me, it just makes it more digestible. But I don't know. I can relate with that experience of writing psalms now that I've kind of written poems in a similar uh, theme.
Mm. That's very interesting to kind of um, relate it to the songs. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Well, I'm looking forward to that book coming out soon. I've been waiting for it for a couple months now, so can't wait
Yeah,
till you
it's
finally
been long
release
in
it.
coming.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we got about 2 minutes left. Any final thoughts you want to share with us?
yeah. No, I really appreciate you having me. I think one of the things, just to reiterate, that God has a path and a plan that everyone, it can experience and is laid out for them, and we can kind of discover that as we get to know Him better, and it's something that can make us very happy, and it's something that uh, we can have breakthroughs at certain points, and sometimes that's at older, younger parts of our lives. But having that openness to where is God leading me and trying to follow that path to the extent that I can, and it's a lifelong project. But trying to do that and recognize it requires a lot of sacrifice and service to others. That's where I found a lot of meaning through all the you know learning about family history with the military background, discerning whether that's a calling for me, and then ultimately getting into engineering and Opus Dei and poetry, and integrating that together within my life. That's where I found a lot of meaning, just trying to direct all that to God.
Amen. Well, that's a very powerful meaning you have there, James, and we thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome, and we'll keep in touch. I hope you have a great night.
Yes, likewise. Looking forward to staying in touch and have a great evening.
Take care.
Take care.